The member for Hotham.
Deputy Speaker, I move the motion relating to social services funding in the terms in which it appears in the notice paper. Deputy Speaker, the Springvale Benevolent Society has been serving the people of Springvale and surrounds now for 53 years. They are an essential, integral part of the social services network in my electorate. Through a team of long-term, hard-working volunteers, they deliver food vouchers, blankets and other essentials to the people in my community who are doing it the toughest. Deputy Speaker, around Christmas Eve last year, the Springvale Benevolent Society received some bad news. Their entire budget of emergency relief had been cut. Speaker, the Springvale Benevolent Society is just one of a number of groups I will talk about today who are amongst those at the pointy end of a $270 million cut to frontline social services. Right around the country, the community sector is being ravaged by these cruel cuts. Last month, the member for Isaacs, Bruce and I held a forum to bring together these service providers and try to piece together what we can about the situation on the ground. What we know is that emergency relief, financial counselling, parenting programs, support for bushfire victims, housing and homelessness organisations and organisations that support people with disabilities have all had their funding slashed. These organisations have seen their funding cut and they serve literally, Deputy Speaker, the most vulnerable people in our country. This is going to particularly hurt, Deputy Speaker, in my electorate of Hotham. I represent one of the most multicultural places in Victoria. Many families in the region I represent have no one else to turn to. We have high numbers of recent refugees and recent migrants who have limited support networks. We have large amounts of affordable housing and caravan parks. We have a lot of people in our community who are affected by a life of disability. The organisations that deliver emergency relief in this community are the last stop for these people when they have literally nowhere else to go. Speaker, governing and in particular budgets are about making priorities. In the last budget, the government decided to give tax relief to big miners and big polluters while taxing the sick and increasing the burdens on those who can least afford to pay. And in doing so, the government made a decision that it would expand the group of people who will ultimately be relying on these last port of call services. The decision to cut the funding going to the most vulnerable Australians, though, I have to say, is taking this terrible prioritisation to new heights. This is a funding cut that is directed to people who have been at the back of an unemployment queue for years. This funding cut is directed at the homeless, Deputy Speaker. It is directed at Australians with mental illness. All of these people, believe it or not, in this wealthy and prosperous country of ours, are people who do not have food in the cupboard at certain points in the month. Deputy Speaker, these are the most vulnerable Australians. Now, there are other organisations which serve my electorate that have a specific ethnic focus that have had their funding cut, and I want to refer to some of the work that these organisations do. One organisation is the Vietnamese Community of Australia. They deliver support specifically to Vietnamese families. They have a special focus for families with a person in the family who has a disability. I'm sure I don't have to explain, Deputy Speaker, the deep cultural elements to this particular type of challenge that faces these families. It's appropriate that a Vietnamese organisation supports these families, and what I hear from the organisations is that a lot of their work is about helping these families get connected into mainstream services that they would not know existed without these specific organisations with specific expertise in these ethnic communities. Now, Speaker, one issue that should not go undiscussed is the ham-fisted way in which these funding cuts were administered. First, there was the notification on Christmas Eve. Second, no information or explanation of why these organisations that have served these communities for decades are having their funding cut, just a cold letter saying that funding had been refused. The letter, believe it or not, was not even addressed to individuals or individual organisations. Is this any way to treat organisations run by diligent volunteers who have given up so much? Now, Speaker, there are lots of other providers in my electorate that are losing funding, but they've asked me not to name them today because for those that have been given a little bit of funding under the program, those seeing their funding savagely cut, they've been told that if they tell anyone about the funding amount that they've been given, that funding will be taken away. These are the type of tactics that we see again and again from this government. I've written to the Minister for Social Services to ask him how these arrangements are going to be transitioned and ask him to restore this funding. I've not received a response, but Deputy Speaker, these services will not give up the fight and neither will I.
I thank the member for Hotham.